we tend not to get any small fish.
Yeah.
I would love it if we had 40 and 50 pounders.
Yeah. That'd be a lot of fun.
It'd be a lot of fun. Well, it'd be a lot less work.
Yeah.
But you get a lot more jumps, and
Yeah.
it'd be a lot less work. But we tend to. I don't know why. I don't know if it's because of their spawning.
Mm.
But we tend to really get big fish.
And then what's a big one?
A big one's 120 pounds, 130 pounds.
Okay.
That's a 7-foot fish.
Yeah.
And it's all you want.
Can confirm that fish that I caught whooped my ass like no fish has ever whooped my ass before.
They'll do that.
Yeah. These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. One thing that I love about Pamlico is thinking about pirates. What do you know about the pirate history in that area?
It goes way back.
Yeah.
I think, well, that area started seeing European contact in the mid-1600s. A lot of the people from Jamestown in Virginia, mostly traders, started moving into the Neuse River Basin and interacting with the Indians. And then small settlements started springing up. Obviously, the water was how they made their living. And, of course, Ocracoke, which is where Blackbeard died.
Oh, he died on Ocracoke.
Well, he died in the Sound right behind Ocracoke.
Okay.
So it's always been a haven because of it was pretty remote.
Yeah.
Hard to get to.
Hard to get to. There's lots of places to hide and a difficult place to attack.
Exactly. So the biggest problem we had with navigation in the Sound and the rivers, other than sandbars, was the oyster beds.
Okay.
And if you read the early descriptions of that area, going back to the Sir Walter Raleigh expeditions, they all described that the biggest hazards to navigation were the oyster rocks.
So for people that like just think of an oyster as something that they might order at a restaurant, what is an oyster bed or an oyster rock, and what can that do to a ship?
Well, oysters are shellfish, and as a larva, they reach a stage where they attach to something.
Okay. And
they make these huge beds, and they grow. They grow in height over, years. I don't think that the shells themselves, I don't think, did any damage, but you would run aground.
Yeah.
Yeah. So draft, well, you have to understand those pinnaces or boats that they used. The deepest place in Pamlico Sound is 21 feet. And these oyster beds would raise up to where there was probably only 2 feet of draft.
And they can be tough to see.
And these boats were drawing 6 feet.
Right.
And they could be really tough to see because, of course, back then, the early explorers said that they could see the bottom in Pamlico Sound.
Really?
Yeah. Oysters are filters. They filter the water. It's really remarkable how efficient they are.
And it's like gallons of water per oyster per day, right?
Per day.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's incredible. And also, in the early years, there were more inlets.
Okay.
So the Sound was being flushed more often, and the salinity was higher. It was a different world than today.
Tell me a little bit about what Pamlico Sound is?
It is the second largest estuary on the East Coast.
So it's a mix of salt and fresh water.
It's a brackish estuary.
Yep.
Second only to Chesapeake Bay.
Gotcha. And it is located between the continental United States and the barrier islands, which are the Outer Banks of North Carolina.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
And it's huge. Like, you know, I've been places out in the Sound before where I couldn't see land. And it's remarkable for me to be in a place like that isn't open ocean. You know, it's a big piece of water.
yeah, my house, I live on Broad Creek, which is on the western edge of the Sound. And it is exactly 36 miles from my house due east to Ocracoke.
And the Neuse River, that's got to be the largest river coming into Pamlico Sound.
Yes.
And it's the widest river in the world.
Yes. It's one of the biggest rivers in the world, actually.
Really?
Yeah. Well, it goes all the way past Raleigh. So past central North Carolina.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it drains a really large area
Uh-huh.
out of the Appalachians, basically, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And at its mouth, it's wider than any other river in the world.
Yep. I would say the mouth of the Neuse River is 8 to 10 miles wide.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we're starting to paint the picture of a place that's really special for fish, right? We've got these oyster beds. We've got a huge estuary. It's got protection from the ocean because of the barrier islands. Because of that, there are some big fish that show up there.
Well, for a lot of fish, it is their instinct to come from the ocean and go up the river to spawn, which I think is a lot of places are that way.
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of flounder, speckled trout, shrimp, croaker, spots, menhaden, mullet, skates or cow nose rays, I think is what they call them.
And mullet is a fish in this case.
Mullet is a fish,
not a hairstyle or a statement.
Yeah, not what you used to wear when you were younger, Jim.
I don't think I ever did. You know, if I ever had a mullet, it wasn't by choice. You know, and I'm not against mullets. There's some good ones out there. There's some bad ones out there. But the mullet that we're talking about is an incredibly important fish. You know, it's like I think the mullet is probably as important to the East Coast as the sardine is to the West Coast.
I would think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very important bait fish. And they get big enough. The mullet roe is a valuable resource in some places in the world. And they're not a bad fish to eat. I think it's more of a local delicacy than most places.
There was a mullet festival where I used to live in Swansboro.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a big deal.
It's an important fish.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of these fish like the gray trout, the stripers, tarpon, and what we call old drum. I think in Louisiana, Georgia, and places they call them bull drum.
Redfish.
Redfish. We call them old drum.
Yeah. Old drum and puppy drum, right?
Old drum and puppy drum.
Same fish, different size.
Yep. A puppy drum is anything smaller than 18 inches.
Okay.
And then from our slot where we can keep one is from 18 to 27 inches.
Yeah.
So the name for a fish 18 to 27 inches is a slot drum.
Okay. I remember that, and I remember thinking I've got to figure out a way to measure this so that when I was pulling one up in the surf, I could determine right then whether that fish was coming home with me or not. So from the tip of my middle finger to the bend on the inside of my elbow is 18 inches. And then if I go up to my armpit, that's 27 inches. So if the length of that fish fell anywhere along my bicep, then that was a fish that was going to die and come home and get blackened and eaten.
That was a good way to do it.
Yeah.
You know, they make rulers, too, that you can put on your boat or...
I've heard that. But this was with me all the time. You know,
that's true.
I'm a forgetful.
It's hard to lose it, right?
I'm a forgetful human. Yeah, if I lose this ruler, I've got bigger problems.
Well, you should just get a ruler tattoo.
Oh, there we go.
On one arm.
Yeah.
And that way you'd always have it.
Then it just gets smaller as I got older.
So the drum has become a very important resource for our area because it's world-class fishing. It's not just good fishing. It's world-class fishing.
It is galaxy-class fishing.
Yeah, and we have people that come from all over the world for that fishery. And now, you know, in the old days, before fiberglass boats were really prevalent, the guys would line up on the beaches and fish from the beach for them. And they ate them.
Yeah.
And I remember as a kid, the old timers would take old drum and make these huge stews out of them because they're really strong fish. So stews were the best way.
Yeah.
And I saw drum when I was a kid that they would scale with a hoe. And that's the truth. They'd lay them on the ground and scale them with a hoe.
With a garden hoe.
With a garden hoe.
Yeah.
And we're talking. It's not abnormal to catch a 51 inch drum.
Yeah.
It's not common, but it's not abnormal.
Right.
I would say the average size that we catch would be 45 to 48 inches.
And how much does a 45-inch drum weigh?
You're looking at 50 pounds.
And do they fight hard? I know the answer to this question, but
they do. They pull real well. It is a fight.
They make you talk to yourself while you're fighting them.
Well, after the 10th fish, you start wondering if you want to grab the next rod.
Yeah.
We've seen that too.
Yeah. When you took me and my good friend Will Mahone out there, I remember distinctively the point in the night where a rod doubled over because there was another drum on, and Will saw it and he turned away because he just didn't have it in him. He just didn't have it in him to reel in another fish. And to have such an incredible fishing experience that you tap out and you say, I've had enough, it is incredibly special.
Well, to come to his defense,
yeah,
which he caught a lot of grief over that because, you know, he was a Marine officer and I was Army, and you can't help in those situations to not be a little competitive, and he, you know, I think Marines were always trained not to quit, and I think that's the first time I ever saw one quit.
Yep.
So, but in his defense, though, there is a technique for catching big fish. And if you're not used to it, or if you do not understand that technique, you will work yourself to death.
So what's the technique? Can you describe it?
A lot of it is timing. When you drop down, you whine.
Yep.
And then you don't fight the fish back. You just put constant pressure on him to come back. And then you go down quick and whine. And a lot of it is the way you hold the rod and where you place it below your belly button. And there's a technique, and it takes some experience. But a big fish, if you're working too hard, will wear you out.
I see a lot of people keep their arms bent when they're holding the rod instead of keeping their arms straight. And when we're working on, you know, the big fish that we have here, if you keep your arms bent, pretty soon your muscles are just going to wear out. But if you lean back and straighten out your arms a little bit, then you can hold on for a lot longer.
Absolutely. It's like you don't want to give the fish a rest,
Yep.
but you want to give yourself a rest whenever you can.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I always say either he's taking line or you're taking line. So there's no stalemates. There's no times when line isn't either coming in or out. One of us is doing it. And I want to fight fish really aggressively, as much for the health of that fish as anything. Like the quicker we can get that fish in and either dead in the cooler or released, the better it is for that animal.
Absolutely. And a lot of fish, I mean, you're at war.
Yep.
And if he goes left, you want to pull right. If he goes right, you want to pull left. And as you get better at the technique and build up a lot of experience, you can whip a bigger fish in really a short period of time.
Yep.
I can whip a drum in 5 minutes.
Yep.
Where he's beat.
Yep.
I've had clients and seen people that it took them 30 minutes to whip it.
I think the longest I ever worked on a drum was when we were jigging for pinfish because we were out at cut bait because we'd been catching so many drum. You remember that? And
I do.
I hooked that drum on that little pinfish rod, and I was like, not gonna quit. Like, we might be here for a while, but as long as we're hooked up, like, I'm not just gonna snap this thing off. But we got it to the boat too.
It was a challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, and you did great. Most people, it's a different outcome.
So that's drum, and that's incredible all on its own. But a fish that really lives rent-free in the imaginations of most fishermen is the tarpon. And that's the Silver King. It is a fish that people get obsessed with. And I think that there's only a handful of fish species in the world that really can change the way somebody lives their life. Steelhead is one of them. Marlin and other billfish is another group. Tarpon is a fish that people will change everything about their life so that they can fish for tarpon more. But what we think of when we think of tarpon fishing is somebody down in the Florida Keys on a flats boat getting pulled around and probably fly fishing for them. And, if they can jump 100-pound fish, that's a really incredible thing. And there's another type of tarpon fishing in another place that's very different, and that's Pamlico Sound. That's what I want to talk with you about.
Yeah, tarpon is definitely a bucket list fish. They are a prehistoric fish. They're very strong, and they're designed for torque. They're designed to be strong, and they have these tremendous bursts.
Mm-hmm.
They're a very aggressive predator fish, and that's what they're designed to be. And one thing that makes tarpon kind of hard is they have very hard mouths.
So like that, the inside of their mouth is hard for a hook to penetrate?
Their inside of their mouth is very hard, so
Yeah.
it's really hard to get a hook to stick.
Okay.
When I was a kid, in the 70s, and we never heard of tarpon. And I grew up on the water, commercial fishing.
Yep.
And never saw a tarpon.
Yep.
Never had any idea that there were tarpon around.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until it's really funny. I worked on a shrimp boat with one of my high school teachers in the summer, and he was an avid fisherman. And I remember in the afternoons when our last drag, he would have me set aside a basket of spots and croakers.
Which are fish.
So, they're good eating fish too, but they're smaller fish,
Yep.
like 10-inch fish.
Yep.
And I thought he was eating them.
Mm.
Well, come to find out, Owen Lupton, and a man named Vernon Rose were out jigging for gray trout,
Mm-hmm.
and they hooked a tarpon on a jig. And so these guys weren't very analytical guys, very competitive, very good sportsmen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they loved a challenge.
Yep.
And so when they were gray trout fishing, they weren't fishing for just food fare like everybody else was. They weren't just looking to fill up a cooler and go home and have a fish fry. They were fishing for like giant gray trout, 9-pound gray trout. And so they jumped a tarpon. So Owen and Vernon decide, well, what do we need to do to catch these? And for probably 7 or 8 years, these guys kept this fishery a secret. I mean, they would be fishing for tarpon and literally have a tarpon on, and somebody would be coming by on a boat, and they would put it in free spool, lay the rod down in the bottom of the boat, and start jigging like they were fishing for trout, just to keep people from knowing what they were doing.
This is just completely amazing to me. So we've got this huge area that has a lot of fishing going on in it. And up until, like, what years are we talking about here?
That was around probably 77, 78.
So until the 70s, people didn't even know that there were tarpon there?
Well,
because they porpoise, surely people were seeing them.
Yeah, but tarpon, if you're not looking for them, if you don't know what you're looking at, we have a lot of things in the water that breach the water.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So you're kind of used to things like turtles and porpoise, and even drum will breach.
Stingrays. Yeah.
And if you're not looking, it's amazing. I never saw a tarpon until I went tarpon fishing with Owen, and he said, "There's a tarpon roll." So I never saw a tarpon until I knew what to look for and was looking for them.
So this is an emerging fishery that starts in the 70s, and they keep it a secret just to themselves for 8 years. And they were using those spots and croakers from the shrimp boat for bait.
They were using it for bait.
Okay.
And I still give him a hard time about that today.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he could have at least invited me to go.
Right.
But these guys were, they developed a technique to catch these fish. And it was challenging because the Neuse River is a very silty. I would say the visibility would be on a really good day, maybe 3 feet.
Yeah.
And so in Florida or the Caribbean, wherever they catch tarpon in the South,
yep,
they have this really clean, clear water that they're fishing in. So, and tarpon do have really big eyes, so they feed visually quite a bit. And that was one aspect we don't have in the Pamlico Sound and Neuse River. It's all about scent, and I think it's all about vibration. So you can take sight out of it, which is a big deal, I think.
Yeah.
So these guys started using cut bait, and first you have to find them.
Right.
You have to find the fish, and they back then there were huge pods of them.
Yep.
Tarpon are very social fish, I think. They usually swim around in pods, and we're talking anywhere from 5 fish to 500 fish.
Yep.
In a pod. So,
if you saw 500 tarpon at once, that's quite a deal.
And in the early days, they would, if they came, and even when I started tarpon fishing, if I came across a pod of 100 fish, I wouldn't even stop.
Yeah.
I would run around until I found the big pod.
You wanted to find more.
Yeah.
Did they kind of stay in an area, or are they moving around quite a bit?
They move. What they're doing is they come in through the inlets, usually around mid-June.
And inlets are breaks in the Outer Banks?
Yes, they're breaks in the Outer Banks between the ocean and the Sound.
Okay.
And there's a lot of current. Most of them have pretty good channels.
Yep.
And I think, it's instinctual for them, but I think, too, they follow the bait. They followed the bait into the inlet.
Right.
And they come into the Sound, but ultimately they're working up the river.
Okay. All right. So you're seeing massive pods of tarpon and going out, and then what? Because this isn't a fly fishing area. To the best of your knowledge, has anyone caught a tarpon on a fly there?
I haven't heard of not one person that has caught one on a fly. I remember years ago, I owned a marine business, and I worked on Lefty Cray's boat.
Yep.
And he was there for a week. And Lefty Cray was probably one of the most legendary fly fishermen, or saltwater fly fishermen. I should probably say that.
Everybody knows Lefty Cray.
Yeah. And he spent a week there and did not catch a tarpon on a fly.
Yeah. No, if you've held cork in one hand and chicken feathers wrapped around a hook in the other, you've probably heard of Lefty Cray.
Yeah.
And he was a tremendous writer. He made fly fishing really accessible to a lot of people. Some of the ways that he developed rods for outfits like Temple Fork, they made some of the most castable fly rods that I've ever come across that were really affordable. I think he did just wonderful things for the sport and showing people, how to cast, how to fish, developing gear to make it more accessible. And he just seemed like a gentleman throughout. And if a guy like that with, some of the most popular saltwater flies ever conceived named after him, if he can go there and get stumped by these fish, fishing for him for a week, then that means that it's not, I'm not saying it's impossible, it's just not the right way to fish there.
And I think it'll be done.
Yeah.
Now with a lot of the new plastic baits, we are starting to get some bites on some artificial stuff, which, and I think too, Jim, it depends on what you focus on.
Yeah.
So these guys developed this technique with cut bait, and they're fishing sometimes 10 to 12 rods at a time.
Okay. Less than 20 feet of water.
20 feet of water.
And it's murky.
And it's murky.
Yeah.
And the tackle, they used a lot of TLD 15s and stuff back then because that's what they were kingfishing.
I don't know what that is.
It's a bait casting reel.
Okay.
Now there's a lot of spin casting reels and stuff that can handle that kind of strain.
Yep.
We're using, in the early days, we were using 30-pound mono, and then we would go to a 50-pound wind-on leader, and we'd do about 30 or 40 feet of that.
What's a wind-on leader?
It gives it some shock resistance.
Okay, so is it like twisted or furled?
No, it's, you just do, you attach the 50-pound to the 30-pound with like a double uni.
Okay.
And we would do 30 to 50 feet of that. A couple things. One, it gave it a lot of shock resistance because these are powerful fish. It gave it some chafe resistance.
Yeah, for when they're down those oysters, which are sharper.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, when you got them close to the boat, you could get some of that wind-on leader wound up on, and you could hold the spool. You could control the fish better around the boat because they tend to, if they're not really whipped, they can be a real handful when they're boat side.
Yep.
And dangerous.
Yep.
So it gives you more control.
Yeah.
And so then we would go down. We'd put a slide weight, a couple beads, and a 3-ounce weight, and then a swivel. And then we use 90 to 100-pound fluoro leader. And I like to use about 6 feet, but most people only use about 3 feet a leader.
Okay.
The reason I use 6 feet is because when you're dealing with a 6-foot fish, it gives you a little extra chafe protection.
Okay.
If your line's rubbing on its tail, or they have really sharp scales.
Okay.
So I always like that little extra protection from getting chafed off.
Yep. I did the same thing when I was fishing for sharks off the beach, as I would use a leader that was as long, at least, as the shark that I planned on catching, because their tails are just brutal on that line.
Yeah.
So it's something that trout anglers don't have to think about very often, is, a fish that is sharp on its entire body.
And they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then we use, we'll snell on 6 to 8-aught J-hook. I think we're starting to use more circle hooks.
Okay, so the circle hooks are penetrating in their mouth, okay?
Well, no, the hookup ratio is a lot different with the circle hooks. You probably will lose, it's probably 3 to 1.
Okay.
Hookup ratio. With J hooks, the hookup rate is pretty good.
Yeah.
But it's not good for the fish.
Right. Is the retention higher once they're hooked up with a circle hook?
I think if you get a good hookup with a circle hook, it's the same. It's actually better.
I think it's better.
I think it's, with a J hook, the hook is usually hooked somewhere inside the mouth.
Okay.
So you're dealing with a lot of chafe from their teeth because they have these small teeth.
Okay.
You just can't see them.
Yeah.
And it's really rough, and they chafe really bad. Whereas a circle hook usually hooks in like the corner of the mouth, and there's no leader material in the mouth. So I think if you get a good hook set, the circle hook's a lot better.
Yeah. It's hard for them to shake it out too.
If they're hooked.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you'll know the first jump.
Yeah.
Because the first jump, you'll know whether they're hooked or not.
Okay. Yeah. And these fish that you're dealing with, how big are they?
A small one where we are, that's another mystery that we have too, Jim. A smaller tarpon where we are is 80 pounds, probably up to 115 pounds. We tend not to get any small fish.
Yeah.
I would love it if we had 40 and 50 pounders.
Yeah. That'd be a lot of fun.
It'd be a lot of fun. Well, it'd be a lot less work.
Yeah.
You get a lot more jumps, and it'd be a lot less work. But we tend to, I don't know why. I don't know if it's because of their spawning, but we tend to really get big fish.
And then what's a big one?
A big one's 120 pounds, 130 pounds.
Okay.
That's a 7-foot fish.
Yeah.
And it's all you want.
Can confirm that fish that I caught whooped my ass like no fish has ever whooped my ass before.
They'll do that.
Yeah.
Experience has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
And it depends on the fish. And I think too.
I had never fought a big fish from the gunnels of a boat before. And I just had to walk laps around that boat of yours on the gunnels. And I was scared the whole time of that fish pulling me in and getting eaten by a bull shark.
You were very athletic that day. The good thing about tarpon fishing is usually it's very calm.
Yeah.
So you can see the fish. But sometimes it can be more of a pleasure to see other people, especially inexperienced people, fighting a monster than actually watching the fish.
Tell me about the citations.
Well, North Carolina has a great program. If you catch, they'll put a certain size on a fish, what they consider abnormally big fish or a big fish, and if you catch one, you can send the measurements and information in to the state, and they will send you out a really nice citation as a memento or a keepsake that has the date the fish was caught, the size of the fish, and of course all your name, and a really nice picture of the fish on it. It's really neat because it really is an accomplishment.
Yeah.
And the state, I like the way they encourage that.
Yeah. It's a really special thing that North Carolina does that honors that. And it's not just for fish that you kill, right? We release this tarpon healthy.
Oh, yeah. The old drum and the tarpon are strictly sport.
Yeah.
A lot of the bigger trout, I think we're getting better with the bigger speckled trout too, because the bigger trout are the females.
Yeah.
And to be honest, they're not really good to eat at that point anyway. Anything over like 4-pound trout, it's not really as good to eat anyway.
Right.
So we're seeing a lot better. People are getting a lot better about catch and release.
Good.
It's kind of like largemouth bass. Even though they're really a good fish to eat, culture has made it where it's almost taboo to keep one.
Yeah. Okay. Getting back to the tarpon. We started in the late 70s where we didn't even know that there were that big a fish around or that tarpon could be caught there. Now there's tarpon tournaments every year.
Well, they had a really big tournament for probably 15 years. There was a guy that started fishing with Captain Owen, and he was a realtor and really nice guy and avid sportsman, big game hunter. And he started fishing with Owen, and he was also a member of the local Rotary Club. And he decided that it would be a really good way, not only to promote the area, but to raise money for the Rotary Club. And so he, by then, there were a few people who were doing it, who were fishing. So, but they started a tournament. And then the cat was out of the bag. And we were seeing 75 to 100 boats entering the tournament. It was a 2-day tournament. It did really well for the Rotary Club. I don't know. Some of the locals were pretty upset about it because it drew in a lot of tourists.
Right.
You know how fishermen are.
Oh, yeah.
You know.
Yeah, everybody wants their own fair advantage.
But it was good. It was good for the community.
Yeah.
They might have been a little upset at first, but now a lot of people come to the area to catch a tarpon. Not everybody can afford to go to Key West to catch a tarpon.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and man, Florida guides are a bunch of assholes. Whenever I get clients up here that that have just been tarpon fishing in Florida, they'll, snag their flies on the brush or, miss a hook set, and they get scared and they go, "Oh, I'm sorry about that." It's like, why? Like, break it off. Like, I'll tie a new one on. We'll move on. We're just out here having fun. And those Florida guides are not like that, man. They're super aggressive. They're yelling at their clients, and those guys are just scared. And I wish those guys had quit doing that. And I've heard other guides defend them. I've heard anglers defend them. And I'm not there. I think it's bullshit. Like, we're out here fishing for fun. Like, let's just have fun. I don't think there's cause for a guide to yell at a client because he missed a fish.
Well, there's no defense for that.
Yeah.
But I do think that some guides, after they've done it a while and they're going through so many people, I think they lose touch with why the client is there to begin with.
Yeah.
And the guide is in this environment every day. He takes it for granted, and he forgets that his client does not get to see this every day.
Mm-hmm.
And that for the client, 90% of it is just being there.
Yeah.
And I think guides sometimes think that the fish is more important than it really is, because a good client is there for the whole experience. And it's not just about catching.
Yeah.
It's about all of it.
Try and keep them comfortable. Don't let them get too hot. Don't let them get too cold. Don't let them get hungry. Don't let them get thirsty. Don't let them get drunk. And just keep them safe and do the best job that you can to give them those opportunities. And if they miss it, don't make them feel bad about themselves. Like, that's not a positive experience.
Yeah, they're not professional fishermen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyways.
Well, the guiding in Pamlico,
yeah.
Our big money fish is the drum.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of guides, and we do have more guides now
Mm-hmm.
in Pamlico Sound.
Good.
Are very reluctant to take tarpon parties.
Yeah.
And it's because tarpon are really hard fish to catch.
Yeah.
They're very finicky. There's been times when I've sit out there in a huge pot of tarpon and sit there for hours waiting for them to turn on.
Yep.
They're very finicky.
Yeah.
And it's not that the clients don't enjoy that, but it's very weather reliant. It's not always calm enough to tarpon fish. And when somebody's booking a trip in a month in advance, it's very hard to guarantee that you're going to have a slick, calm day to take them out. Now, what they will do is if they have a party for drum,
Mm-hmm.
and it turns out to be this beautiful day,
Right.
and they're seeing some tarpon, most guides will say, "Hey, you want to catch a tarpon?"
Yeah.
And if the client is willing to take the risk
Mm-hmm.
to fish for the tarpon, it could be a good day.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of them do.
Yeah. All right. So there are some opportunities there if you find the right guide, but the power play is to go book a drum trip, and if you are so fortunate that the conditions align themselves so that you can go tarpon fishing, your guide's probably going to take that opportunity because it's a great thing to go try. If somebody was a private party and they wanted to drag their boat out there and give it a shot, how do they even get started? It's such a big piece of water.
I'd hire a guy first.
Yeah.
And just tell the guy, hey, I want to catch a tarpon on my boat.
Yeah.
And a lot of the guys where I'm from, they'll get on your boat,
right,
if you want them to.
Yeah.
Just be honest. Say, hey, I want to start coming down here. I want to catch tarpon. Can you take me out and just show me around and show me what I need to know? And I can't think of one guy in that area that wouldn't be just tickled to death to do that.
Right.
For one thing, it's an easy buck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would do that because there's a lot of water. It's a big place.
Yep.
And the chances of you, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but you could learn more on one trip with a good guide about what you need to do than it would probably take you 2 years to do on your own.
Yep.
So it's, it's a lot of money to book well, not a lot, but it costs to book a guide.
It's smart
but in
money.
the long run, it's the most economically, it's the best way to do it.
And I do the same thing. When I go to new fisheries and I want to learn about it, I book a guide and I tell the outfitter right off the bat, like, hey, I'd like to come back here with my own boat. I'm a guide. This is where I live. This is where I work. I'm going to be here like once every 2 years, but I'd like to be able to catch fish when I come. And they're like, cool. What time of year are you going to come? Like, let's work on the places and the techniques that are going to be suitable for that time.
Absolutely.
And, I think that honesty is really important there. And, dude, if you're traveling to a place to fish there, you are taking from that community. If you can find ways to support that community by buying your fuel while you're there, by buying your tackle while you're there, by hiring a guide, by eating at restaurants, spend your money where you go to recreate. And, these communities that have recreation, they really depend upon that.
Well, it is. It's a resource.
Yep.
Some people have mines and like stores and stuff.
Yeah.
Our resource is our fish.
Yeah.
Our fishery, our water, and they're nice people, and fishing is just like hunting. It's a universal language.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether you're from Oregon or North Carolina. If you're from Oregon and you go to North Carolina to fish, the conversation is the same.
Yeah.
And enthusiasm is the same.
Yeah.
And so it's really cool the way outdoor sports work that way.
Yeah.
How it brings people together.
What kind of a boat does a guy need?
Well, for tarpon fishing, I would say
probably not an aluminum riddle jet boat.
No. I would say nothing below 19 feet.
Yeah.
And because it's a fair weather sport.
Okay.
The only thing is, if you're out in something smaller like that, you really need to keep your eye on the weather, because the weather can turn pretty quick. And even in a 19-foot boat, depending on your skills, you'll be safe. I think a 23 to 25 foot V-hull fiberglass center console is probably, or cabin boat, is probably the best thing.
Yeah.
Because weather, it's a big place. It can get really rough.
Yeah.
It can actually get as bad as the ocean. I've seen days when we were sitting there in mirror glass water, tarpon fishing, and you see the dark clouds up the river, and you look up, and a mile away you see this white water coming your way. And what it is, it's a wind front. So in just amount, it can go from mirror glass. In 20 minutes, it can be 3-foot seas. So we used to have a place. We were in the Sound. There was a place called Cedar Island, and it was a ferry dock, a ferry from Cedar Island to Ocracoke. Okay, and there was a little store next to the ferry dock, and when we were in the Sound and had bad weather come in, we would run in, and that store had these coffee cups you could buy. When you buy a cup of coffee, you bought the cup, and then whenever you came back, if you had that cup, you got free coffee. So
great deal.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Yeah.
And so we would all run in and tie off at their dock and run in and drink coffee until the weather went by. And then we'd go out and go back fishing. So just cool stuff.
Yeah. What's the most memorable tarpon of your life?
I think the first one probably is always everybody's most memorable because it's one of those, the first time you have the rod in your hand and the tarpon jumps, I would say 90% of the time, what I hear out of people's mouths is, oh my God.
Yeah.
Because they just don't realize how exciting it is.
Right.
This is a huge fish, and sometimes they're coming 6 feet out of the water,
Yeah.
and you've got him.
Yeah.
You're holding the rod, and that's what most people say is, "Oh my God."
Yeah.
My first fish was actually during a tournament. In the tournament, you couldn't switch rod. You couldn't hand off a rod.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever grabbed the rod, you had to fight the fish to the boat. And my first fish, I was fishing with a buddy of mine, and I grabbed the rod, and it was during a tournament, and I saw this. He just turned white because I'm inexperienced, never caught a tarpon before. There's a lot of money on the line, and but I fought that fish really good, got him to the boat, and then there was no problem after that. But I'll never forget that fish. It was thrilling.
Has anyone won more tarpon tournaments in North Carolina than you?
Not that I know of.
So what's the difference? Like, when we sat down here before I started recording, I said, is anything off limits here? Like, and you said there's no secrets. Like, people know what the fishery is, they know what the techniques are. So what's the difference between how you're going out to catch fish and how everyone else is? Like, how is it that you're able to do it better?
I'm very technical. Just like any type of outdoor sport, like hunting, or there's a technical side to that sport.
Yep.
And I'm very technical.
Okay.
I think my biggest strength is I don't lose fish.
Yep.
Okay. And it's because my tackle, I'm not lazy with my tackle.
Yep.
The little things, little flaws in like the leader, little things in your tackle is really important. And things like bait. My bait is fresh.
Yeah.
My bait was caught the evening before.
And put immediately on ice.
And put them no, not put on. Well,
not
yes.
Put on ice. Okay.
You put them in Ziploc bags.
Okay.
And then you put them in ice.
Don't want to water them down.
Don't want the slime iced off of them.
Okay.
It's just little things. Little things is what I think makes me a good competitor.
That was a lesson that I learned in North Carolina about bait, because I had grown up kind of in catfish country where that's the fish that we targeted with cut bait, and you can get away with having bait that's even rotten and still catch catfish on it. But the freshness of bait for the things that I was targeting in Carolina was critically important. Like, it had to be fresh. I had to treat my bait better than I would treat the fish that I was going to eat myself if I wanted to be really productive with it. And when I brought that same mentality back here for catfish, I caught a lot more catfish too.
Yeah. Well, people, good fishermen are hard workers. I'll give you a good example. During the tournament last year, I won with 6 fish.
Okay.
I caught 6 tarpon by noon.
Yep.
It's lines in at 7 o'clock. But a buddy of mine who's a guide actually caught or hooked 7 fish.
Okay.
And he only got 2 to the boat.
Okay.
He was breaking them off. And the difference was we had a lot of bluefish that were eating our baits.
Yep.
And they've got really sharp teeth.
Piranhas.
And they were chafing around the hooks, the leader. And he wasn't retying his hooks.
Yep.
I went through 17 hooks in that period.
Wow.
I retied 17 hooks. That was the difference.
Yep.
So I wasn't really the better fisherman that day because he beat me. But I was more technical.
Yeah. Yeah. And it takes a special mentality to make yourself do that. And I can't tell you, it's innumerable, the number of trout I've lost because I didn't just retie the knot. We caught 10 fish on that fly, and I knew I should retie this, but it's like, go ahead and cast it one more time. Your client's catching fish, and it's like you don't want to slow it down. So hook up another one, and then comes like the fish of the day, like the fish that is going to bring in that tip, and he gets tight on him and gives him a couple head shakes, and pop, there it goes. It's like, ugh, 0 to 0 right there.
Well, I face the same anxiety that everybody does, which is like, oh man, we're in the fish now.
Yeah,
we need to get them while we can. They may shut down any minute.
Yeah.
I face the same anxiety, but I've just been bitten so many times. I've learned it's better just take a moment, take a breather. It's almost like coyote hunting when you rush a shot because he's not going to stand there long.
Yeah.
But you have to force yourself to calm down, make a good shot.
Yeah. It's going to get away.
Yeah.
That's our fear. That's our fear in hunting and fishing and business, relationships. We have that fear that it's going to get away. And oftentimes we needed to be a little bit more patient so that we could have a better response.
Yeah. And that's another thing with tarpon fishing. You do have to be extremely patient. There's a lot of times when they're inside the lines. We call it inside the lines. The fish will be rolling 3 or 4 feet from the boat.
Yeah.
And they're all around. And they'll do that for hours. And then they'll just turn on, and then it's like a chaotic scene for the next hour.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen guys, get 7 or 8 bites in an hour.
Yeah.
When they turn on, and that's why you go.
Yeah.
You go for that moment.
Yeah.
So
if somebody wants to go, who do they get a hold of? Is there a guide service you recommend?
I'd recommend Down East Guide Service.
Guide Service.
Or Four Seasons.
Okay.
Four Seasons is really good, and very good fisherman. He will take very good care of you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Down East is a fun term that describes a region of Eastern Carolina that are the most lawless, rugged people I ever encountered in this country. And they are the descendants of pirates, straight up. So if you want to hear some pirate stories, I bet Down East Guide Service has it for you, because they're probably related.
I would say so. We have boots down there, these rubber boots. They're white, okay, and we call them Pamlico County Nikes.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really want to know what a real fisherman looks like, he would probably be wearing those white boots.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the folks that wear extra toughs out here. Same thing. Yeah.
So,
all righty, sir. Thank you so much. Gene, it's just been such a pleasure having you out here this week. We got to go up Hell's Canyon. We've got to tour around and see the mountains and the prairie, and we saw a pile of wildlife. You were just one of the most important people in my life when I got back from deployment, and were really helpful to me. Having been a veteran yourself, you really knew how to guide me through that really difficult phase in my life. And we've remained close friends ever since. I've wanted you out here for years, and I'm so grateful that you were able to take the time and finally come out. And I really appreciate you taking another hour out of your vacation to sit down and talk about tarpon. It's got me all excited.
Oh, I enjoy it, and I love your world. I love your world out here, and I think we discussed earlier. It's good. It's good sometimes to just stop and look around and say, "Wow,
Yeah.
I've got it made."
Yeah.
It's so wonderful.
Yeah.
You know, and this is a beautiful place. And Jim, thank you. I mean, you've taken me around, and my wife was never concerned uh, because she knew I'd be with you.
Yeah.
And she's seen pictures of this area, and it's a rugged area.
Yeah.
And she was like, "Oh, I'm not worried. You'll be with Jim."
Yeah.
So
Cool.
but
Cool.
thank you for a wonderful trip.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure, and we've got more good to come. It's time for us to get after the next phase of it. And folks, just so you know, as you're listening to this, as this show is coming out, it is the beginning of the best time of year to go tarpon fishing. So if you feel like you want to do it, like now is the time. Now is the time. Okay. Thank you. Thank you all very much for listening. I'm going to keep bringing you these stories from normal people just like you who have done extraordinary things. Everyone is an expert at something, and they have interesting perspectives on life and work and the environment and all the things that we care about. I'm going to keep bringing that to you. And I want to thank you so much for making this show possible. I also want to thank Emily Bratcher for producing this show. She does a great job editing. Really appreciate her. I want to thank John Chatelain. He did the art for the Six Ranch podcast. And Celia, soon to be Harlander, she digitized that so that we can get it out there on the internet for you. Also want to thank Justin Hay for writing this original music and the beautiful whistling that you're listening to right now. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. Please keep listening to the show. Write me a review if you feel like it, and just keep doing your thing, and we'll all learn from this together. It's been fun, and we're just getting started.